So welcome everybody for joining us tonight for our regular, almost weekly Sierra Community Conversations. Tonight we have a great couple of speakers lined up, and we'll have some great conversation. We have with us tonight, we have Jeff Wennberg, who's the Commissioner of the Rutland Department of Public Works, and Rick Chaput, who's the Chief Operator of the Sewage and Wastewater Treatment Plant for the city of Vergennes. And both of these gentlemen have great experience with our subject of combined sewer overflows. And so look forward to a great discussion. One thing I would ask, I see everybody's on mute, which is great. I'm sure you're familiar with how important that is in a group like this. But we will have plenty of opportunity for questions and discussion built into our hour here. So with that, I'm going to pass it right along to Jeff Wennberg. Jeff.
Oh, good evening, and I really appreciate the opportunity. I do have a few slides that help illustrate what a combined sewer overflow is, and then some of the specific challenges that a community like Rutland has in trying to manage this situation. So hopefully folks can now see the screen. There we go. I'm gonna figure out how to advance the slides here. Okay, we got it. So in basic terms, combined sewer overflows happen because the storm sewers and the sanitary sewers use the same pipes. Let my clock do its thing. Use the same pipes to deliver both stormwater and sanitary sewage. This is because, typically this is not how you would build a system today, but older communities in the Northeast and the upper Midwest, almost exclusively, this was the way things were developed. So in the upper left, you've got, the horse and buggy era, and there was a sanitary pipe and a storm pipe, and whatever the nearest body of water was, it was just straight piped. And, the wonderful self-cleaning ability of rivers and so forth would just make that sewage and the stormwater just magically go away. Well, not really, but in any event, that's how it was done. When development became more and more dense and people started to complain about the condition of the water, they wanted to move the wastewater, especially, further and further away, and so that another community downstream would have to deal with it. It was just sort of like passing the buck. And so because those pipes were combined, they basically continued that practice. And all it would do would basically combine lots of them and take it, instead of to the nearest brook, it would take it to the nearest river. It wouldn't be treated. Then in the 1960s, principally, the treatment plants were built, and they took this collection system, which was 100 to 150 years old, replumbed it a little bit, and brought these things called interceptor pipes, which would be this one here. So instead of everything going straight to the body of water, it would, under dry weather conditions, go to the treatment plant and be treated. And that was a major, enormous step forward. So down here, you can see sort of physically what happens. So in dry weather conditions, all of the sewage is able to find its way to the treatment plant and does not reach levels in the structures that would cause it to go out to the river. However, when it rains, it overwhelms either the treatment plant or the plumbing between this location and the treatment plant. And the only way to prevent it from backing up with these heavy rainfalls into buildings or onto the street is to allow the excess to go directly out to the river or the lake or whatever the receiving water is. Essentially, a rain event is essentially equivalent to what was going on all the time prior to the development of the treatment plant. So this is a major step forward. and it improved water quality dramatically. But as you can see, this is all about collection systems. So as a result, the cost associated with fixing this gets bigger and bigger and bigger as you do more and more to correct the problem. Combined sewer overflows, and this is numbers from measurements from 2017, but this is somewhat typical, are about 90%, maybe a little more than 90% stormwater and about 10% wastewater. That depends on the storm and the system and everything else, but at least in Rutland, that's a pretty good rule of thumb as far as, you know, what's actually in it. Last 3 years, we've had some very good numbers due to some monitoring that we've been doing. And this is a quick chart showing total volumes for each of the 3 years. 2020 isn't done, but hopefully for CSOs it's done. And in 2020, we had a drought. And so the number of events, and by the way, by event, I mean storm events, not CSO events. The state measures CSOs for each outfall, meaning every place a pipe can discharge to a water body. So the same storm, in our case, we have 4 remaining outfalls. That would be 4 CSOs, combined sewer overflows, in the state's statistics. But it's one storm. So we look at it locally as a number of storm events that had 1 or more combined sewer overflows. And as you can see here, the number of events is the blue line. It was from 35 to, I don't know, about 34. And then down this year, we've had less than 20. We got a drought. It's not surprising. And also, if you look at the total volumes, they follow much the same pattern. Somewhere in the vicinity of 30 million gallons combined to somewhere in the vicinity of 37 million gallons, and then down to about 5 million gallons, a little below, I think, for 2020. This is an illustration of the degree to which, principally, we have made improvements over these years, but really what's going on here is weather patterns. And if we have more and more intense rain, we're going to have more CSOs and more volume going to water bodies. And if we have less, as we did in 2020, we're going to have fewer. It's driven by rain. It is not driven by wastewater. And so this is a CSO map of the city of Rutland. And this is done to illustrate kind of the magnitude of the challenge. The colored areas, these various colors that you see around the map, are combined sewer areas. The areas without color are separated sewers, meaning that the stormwater does not combine and that there's only wastewater coming from the collection areas outside the colored areas. But as you can see, the ones that are shaded are a very significant percentage of the total city. In the last, within the last 7 years, we've done 2 significant separation projects. The first was the green shaded one for $5.2 million. And then this year, we just completed a $2.7 million planned expansion of that, so that this amount of real estate here, which is, I believe, about 110 acres, has been taken offline. It's no longer contributing to combined sewer overflows, and that's one reason why our numbers are down a little bit on volume. The biggest reason is the rainfall. So, you know, that does help, but if you extrapolate these numbers to what would be involved in the whole city, you're looking at somewhere in the vicinity of $150 million to separate everything in the city. And the argument I'm going to make and illustrate here is that we don't even want to do that. We don't want to separate everything. We want to manage and control CSOs, but we don't want to recreate our systems so that they are completely eliminated. And there's a water quality reason for that. And this is one of the complicating factors. This is an outline of the Brook watershed. Brook is an impaired watershed for stormwater. And the main point here is that stormwater and CSOs cannot be managed independent of one another. They have to be done together. In this case, the stormwater is entering the stream in larger and faster quantities during storm events. That's causing the stream to be impaired. So, but one of the solutions would be to increase the combined sewers in these areas within this watershed. That would reduce the amount of stormwater that's being delivered directly to the stream. There are other solutions, and obviously those are the ones that we are pursuing. We're not pursuing increasing CSOs, but it's an illustration of the fact that solving the CSO problem without dealing with stormwater creates water quality problems. And solving the stormwater problem without, by simply, sending it to the treatment plant exacerbates CSOs. So it's kind of a two-edged sword. What we need here, and this is the thing, the point, if this is one point I want to make that hopefully people will take home, is that we need a holistic approach. We need to see the overall impacts on water quality. CSOs are caused by stormwater, not wastewater, and there are two sides of the same coin. They can't be managed separately. Rutland decided, for example, because of the cost and magnitude of the challenge, to generally retain our combined sewers, not to eliminate them all. Yes, we're separating them where that is the best approach. But what we've done also is we've made substantial increases in the size of our treatment plants so that we can treat the stormwater rather than send it untreated or minimally treated to the streams. We run it through the treatment plant in very large quantities so that when it gets to the receiving water, it's cleaner than the receiving water. And that's been our strategy. And here's the illustration of exactly how that works. This is 2017. I don't have more recent numbers, but it was a pretty typical year. In the course of 2017, our wastewater treatment plant, which is the largest in the state, treated a little over 1 billion gallons of wastewater. And as I said, the effluent from the plant is cleaner than the stream into which it is discharged. Stormwater, because of our combined system, was over 600 million gallons of stormwater was also treated at the plant as though it was wastewater, as though it was sanitary sewage. And that amount is actually pretty typical. It's between 600 and 700 million gallons a year. Believe it or not, down here, the 3.16 that's a bar. That's not just a line or a number, that's a bar. And that, on the same scale, is the amount of wastewater that was in total allowed to get to the streams through CSOs. So the volume of CSO wastewater was 3.16 million, and the volume of stormwater treated was 643 million. What is 643 million gallons? It's a big number, but what is it? What is it? Think Lake Elmore. Lake Elmore is about 700 million gallons. So what we had is Lake Elmore over the course of a year, falling on the city of Rutland, running off of roads, roofs, parking lots, picking up all kinds of pollutants, and being treated to a level cleaner than the receiving water before it was discharged. It's a lot of water. If we look at Lake Champlain, and let's look at phosphorus. Wastewater, this is a little old, but the relationships are about the same. Wastewater treatment plant facilities are responsible for about 3% of the phosphorus being the basis of the TMDL for Lake Champlain. But urban stormwater developed lands, including paved roads, is 14%. It's a much larger contributor to the phosphorus problem in Lake Champlain. And of course, here are the other main sectors. So in 2017, we calculate that because that volume of stormwater was treated at the plant, we removed 1,287 pounds of phosphorus that otherwise would have gone to the streams and ultimately to Lake Champlain. If we compare that to the amount of phosphorus that was released in the wastewater portion of the overflows, that's 76 pounds that could have been removed had it gone through the plant. If we separated everything and eliminated the chance of any CSOs, we would reduce phosphorus discharges to Lake Champlain by 76 pounds, and we would increase phosphorus discharges in the vicinity of 1,300 pounds a year. You got to look at it holistically. What are the overall water quality burdens and benefits for the various approaches for dealing with CSOs? Real quickly, this is very old studies that we're going to be repeated, I believe, this summer. We're going to attempt to do that. And this is before all the plant upgrades and all the things that we've invested in, about over $20 million since 1989. in combined sewer overflow investments in the city. And these are coliform because the main concern with CSOs is the bacteria and the viruses that are not treated or disabled or disinfected before they're released. And that's a human health issue, not just a water quality issue. Well, this is before we did all of these things, and we're going to have hopefully some new numbers that will look a lot better than this, I hope. A couple of storms from 1988 where they sampled every hour and then checked the fecal coliform populations or counts. These are very large numbers. This is upstream of the wastewater treatment plant and downstream. Interestingly, downstream was lower. That's peculiar. This is more typical, upstream and downstream. This is dry weather. No stormwater, no runoff involved. Upstream, downstream. The scary thing is that red line is the standard. That's where we're supposed to be. So even in dry weather without CSOs, we are, what is it, about 6 times or greater the standard. The report that came with that basically concluded that regardless of whatever we do with CSOs, the stream is going to be grossly exceeding the bacterial contamination standards from other sources, and largely those other sources are rainfall events. That's stormwater. So stormwater is hardly clean. And here's another, this is from another report. Under wet weather conditions, looking at stormwater and wastewater, urban runoff mobilizes FIB, which is fecal indicator bacteria, and pathogens deposited on the landscape and impervious surfaces collected in catch basins, sediment, or present in biofilms within the storm sewer system. It's not CSOs. This is stormwater. Stormwater is a big problem. So what's in stormwater? Again, I'm going to go fast, so you won't really have a chance to look at this, but this will be recorded, and I'll be happy to send this to anybody. This is urban runoff stormwater, typical of what you see in it for these pollutants. And here's domestic wastewater before treatment. That would be what's in the CSO. Now you got to consider the volume differences. But as you can see, the constituents are very much the same. Phosphorus and nitrogen, much, much higher concentrations. Coliform, much higher concentrations in domestic wastewater than in stormwater. But it's also in stormwater. And some of the other contaminants are as bad in stormwater. So what are the next steps? Coming to the conclusion here. We are in the process of doing a long-term control plan. We're required to do that by the state to schedule projects to meet Vermont water quality standards. And the measures we're going to be looking at are additional separation projects, but not elimination of CSOs. Potential increase in the capacity of the treatment plant to 29 million gallons a day. We're at 22.5 now. And then 3 basic approaches. The lowest cost, lowest hanging fruit approach is called data infrastructure or real-time controls. And that's basically managing your collection system to maximize storage. And by doing that, you delay or in a relatively small event, eliminate the possibility of a CSO, and you hold that combined water in the system and meter it through the treatment plant after the storm passes so that you avoid it. And that is the lowest cost per gallon avoided available. Green infrastructure is basically intercepting the stormwater before it gets in the combined system and either retaining it for release later or attempting, like any stormwater infiltration project, trying to drive it into the ground and keep it from getting in the system altogether. And then finally, the more typical gray infrastructure, the big concrete tanks and pumps and all of the stuff that treatment plants typically use. And it's going to require an expensive combination of all 3 of these things for Rutland to get this under control. So cost, 100% separation is completely beyond the realm of possible. $150 million just to separate. And then we have to deal with the stormwater because we don't want to be sending all of that without any treatment. Data infrastructure, typical around $1.2 million. That's literally very affordable. Green infrastructure, unknown. We're doing the studies now. We'll have probably by mid next year, we'll have some projects identified with ballpark costs. And gray infrastructure, likewise. There was a plan in the 1989 project for some primary treatment plants for our combined sewer overflows, a couple of them. In today's cost, that would be about $30 million today to do that. But we're probably going to have to do something along those lines under any circumstance, because that's the only way that you can disinfect those pathogens, is to do treatment at the point of discharge. So that's probably unavoidable. We also have projects underway. There are these two projects are under construction, but this indicates that we're spending a lot of money on other than CSOs. Separation projects are CSOs. Lake Champlain TMDL, somewhere in the vicinity of $20 million over time. Moonbrook TMDL, probably $20 million over time. And then MS4 requirements, its ongoing requirements, somewhere in the vicinity of probably $300,000 to $500,000 per year ongoing. So clean water is a very expensive but very important commitment. And the central message is we have to look at these things holistically and do the things and make the choices that result in the best results for the receiving waters. And that's my sermon, my pitch.
Great, thanks so much. We'll come back with questions for Jeff Wennberg in a few minutes. If you do have questions, as Rob has put in the chat, go ahead and type your questions into the chat box, and even in a cryptic form, and we'll call on you to voice that when the time comes. But now I want to hand it over to Rick Chaput from Vergennes. Rick.
Thank you. And thank you, Jeff. That was a great presentation. You did all the heavy lifting. Be a little easier for me. So the city of Vergennes is got a lot of the same problems that Rutland has on a smaller scale. The thing that I really like, Jeff, is that you use the word holistically. And that's the way that we're looking at things here in Vergennes as well. Back in 2000, we did an upgrade here. The approach was to upgrade the wastewater plant and actually pump all the stormwater across the river and treat it. At this time, as Jeff has alluded to, the weather patterns have changed. The storms seem to have gotten more intense, and we're having overflows now at the pump station and not at the wastewater treatment plant, which is an important distinction for us to make to the community, is that our wastewater treatment plant is not overflowing. We have a situation in Vergennes where we have one pump station that services the whole northeast side of Otter Creek, which is 90% of our system. So that one pump station acts as a bottleneck. Everything comes down and we just can't physically pump that much across the river. So at this time, we're looking at what the fix to this is going to be. And much like in Rutland, we've looked at possibly a tank, but the real solution to the problem is to address the collection system where the problems are. It's I&I is the real issue. We've also got a problem. We did notice this year with the drier weather, we haven't had nearly the number of overflows. We do tend to have a very high water table here in Vergennes. So high water table, storm conditions, we see very severe CSO events. For us, severe means an average day for us will do 0.28 to 0.3 MGD, so 280 to 300,000 gallons a day. We can go from doing, say, 280 to doing 1.5 million in 20 minutes. That's how severe the infiltration is in our system. And the problem is we're not a true CSO system. We're not supposed to be a combined system. We can't actually identify. We did a lot of work this last summer doing some smoke testing and camera work. Camera work is very expensive. Smoke testing was an effective tool, but we still haven't found that. What we're alluding to is the silver bullet. There's something out there that seems to be directly connected to storm drains or possibly a river crossing where we're seeing all this inflow. But that's a big increase to jump that much in, say, 15, 20 minutes. Another big problem we have in town is sump pumps and some roof drains, things of that. Sump pumps are actually fairly substantial. But the problem we go back to that holistic thing where we can't really tell people to disconnect their sump pumps and pump it outside. Vergennes just being a square mile, very small footprint, sits kind of on a hill. If you're pumping it out back, you're just pumping it into your neighbor's yard and into the neighbor's yard and causing a problem. So places where we've identified the sump pump problems, we haven't been able to remedy because we don't have a comprehensive collection system. So this past year, we've started our preliminary engineering and identified places that we're going to address for collection improvements and stormwater improvements, things of that nature. So that's basically where we're at in Vergennes.
All right, great. Well, thank you. That's a couple of different, very different scenarios,
Yes.
Rutland and Vergennes. Yeah. We have a few questions coming in, so we'll go to our list here. Michael, would you like to ask your question about sort of a green infrastructure question?
Yes. We are actually in South Burlington currently rewriting our environmental protection standards, and I'm advocating for wider buffers around streams, wetlands, habitat blocks, and so on. And I'm not making a lot of headway because the state regulations are quite old and probably were written before we knew much about climate change and the severe weather events that we've experienced recently, particularly rain events, which have obviously overburdened these treatment systems. Not so much in South Burlington, but I know that the city of Burlington has had CSO quite often into Lake Champlain, and the consequence of that is that beaches have been closed, and we've had algae blooms and coliform counts that are not, bad enough to close the beaches, so people shouldn't swim there. So my question is, would the wider buffers, 300 feet instead of 100 or 100 meters, be helpful in absorbing more of the stormwater and putting less of a burden of stormwater onto these treatment systems? I should say that where I come from, which is a third world country, in South Africa, or at least in Cape Town where I grew up, they would look at us as if we're insane having stormwater and sewage in the same pipe. So that's my question.
Any response, Rick or Jeff? How about that wider buffer? Or maybe in addition to that, if you could suggest what some of this green infrastructure would look like.
Well, I can, the wider buffer would definitely make a water quality benefit for stormwater runoff, not necessarily for combined sewer overflows. In the Moonbrook area, that would be a godsend if we could do it. Obviously, it's pretty densely developed. And we've got people where the buffer for one of our Moonbrook itself, actually, the edge of the buffer would go right through several living rooms, as the houses are right there. So there's a limit to what you can do once the development has taken place. With the combined sewers, we've got the catch basins along the street, and it's taking, and parking lots and so forth, and it's taking the water directly off the impervious surfaces, and then that's headed, either to the plant or to the streams if it's an overflow situation. And in those cases, the additional buffers, I don't see would have any effect. But certainly the stormwater, direct stormwater flow overland or across impervious surfaces that is not conveyed through a pipe to a stream there clearly be water quality and phosphorus reduction in particular benefits from that approach. And that is one of the green infrastructure approaches that is like it's sort of like very basic kind of, it's the first thing you do if you've got the real estate to do it, to deal with stormwater runoff. It's very cost effective if you've got the real estate.
Well, there are areas where there's less development in our town, known as the southeast quadrant mainly, where there's a fair amount of open space, and there would be space available for wider buffers. Is there any place that I could find documentation which describes or promotes these wider buffers, or talks about them at least?
I would refer that to the Green Mountain Water Environment Association, which is, they have a lot of resources, and they do educational programs for stormwater practitioners, et cetera. And they would probably be able to give you a decent, kind of a scientific bibliography of the research and what's been published. I would think that that would be one place.
Green Mountain Water
Environment Association.
Environment. Okay.
Yeah. And South Burlington's wastewater treatment plant chief operator is a fellow by the name of Bob Fisher, and he is a former president and he's a committee chairman of that group. So the fellow who operates the treatment plant in South Burlington would be a great resource.
No, I think South Burlington has a fairly, I'm not sure it was the first, but in Vermont, but has a separate stormwater
Utility.
management facility.
Yep.
And yeah, I know the people who run it, so, but I didn't know Mr. Fisher. It's
Yes, and as another South Burlington resident, I can tell you, we pay $80 a year. Every resident, every household pays $80 a year to help clean up the lakes and streams. So we've got another question from Lynn. How economically feasible is it to include replacing impermeable surfaces parking lot with more permeable, especially in downtown Rutland? Impermeable pavement, or permeable pavement, I guess, as a solution.
Well, South Burlington has, and Burlington in particular, has a lot of experience with that. They've been testing various substances and approaches. And I think Rick might have a comment regarding Vergennes, because Vergennes has a lot of clay soils, and you can make it so that the water can get through the pavement, but if it can't get through the soil, it has limited efficacy. One of the problems with that can work, but it requires a lot of maintenance, I guess is a good way to put it, because the voids in the pavement tend to get clogged over time with dust and silt and things like that. And if it isn't maintained, it'll take a number of years, but if it isn't maintained, it will cease to function, or at least its efficacy will decrease. If you have good soils that will be able to take the water, it won't stop when it gets to the native soils beneath whatever is beneath the parking lot. And then that can actually work, but it is an ongoing maintenance expense that when you do large areas of that, you have to build that into your operating costs.
Sophia's got a question. Do you want to ask your question, Sophia?
Yeah, sure. I was just, firstly, thank you for your presentation. And I was just wondering, like, to you, either of you, with regards in your specialty around CSOs, what's the best kind of collection system that you've seen or that you would like to see happen? I know you mentioned some, but I was just curious. And also I had a kind of like a question comment around like educating the public and also like schools too, because I feel like a lot of people don't really know what goes on in the sewage system, that, like our sewage is going into the water, and in the water Lake Champlain runs off into an ocean, and these fish that we eat are eating those chemicals. And I feel like if people really understood that, I think that we'd get a lot more action around it. I mean, maybe I'm just like talking off, but I think just like, yeah, how can we incorporate that into the education system, like that concept of this is how the sewage system works, and so on. That was a lot, but
Rick or Jeff, do you have a response for?
So I guess I would
Go ahead, Rick.
I would speak to the best collection system question is one that's tight and doesn't leak. That's the short answer. The collection systems, as we look at them, and if we're going to really define the collection system, that's the pipes under the ground, all the collectors, the laterals to the homes, the pumping station or lift stations. So there's several components to a collection system. Ideally, these things would be sealed up. The pipes would have good joints and not leak. But unfortunately, what's happened is, we started putting these systems in the ground in the 1900s. We've used several different types of pipe over the years. Frost, time, roots, all these things get in and they wreak havoc on the system. So unfortunately, we end up with this kind of patchwork of pipes that aren't tight. So ideally, we would have a new collection system with new materials where everything would be tight and we wouldn't get the infiltration or the inflow. The next problem we run into is the laterals, which are the lines that are coming from people's private homes. We only have so much ability to enforce regulations and to make sure that those things are tight as well. So it's kind of a complex problem, but the best system would be one that was built with new materials and was built correctly and tight and maintained. Maintenance is another big issue. Unfortunately, a lot of municipalities don't put the time and energy into the maintenance, and that often comes down to cost. It can be very expensive to take care of these systems. To actually know what's going on, oftentimes you have to do camera work, run a camera up the line. If you're going to hire someone to come in and do that, that can cost $2,500 a day, as an idea. So it's very expensive. In terms of the education component of it, City of Vergennes is always open. We take classes from Job Corps, we take classes from the high school, from Hannaford Career Center. I'm always preaching. Anyone that will come through, I'd love to talk to them, and we try to get the message out about these things.
Yeah, I would, in terms of the ideal system, I would say that, it would be one that minimizes impacts on receiving waters. And that could be in several different ways. A combined system like ours can be dramatically effective and protect, and it already is, quite frankly. When it's raining, I suspect we probably do a better job per square mile than any of the separated systems that are out there right now, with or without a CSO, to be honest. But that doesn't mean that's ideal or perfect. And we, as I said, we have tens of millions of dollars at least of additional work to do. So, that's certainly not perfect. The alternative would be a completely separate system, but you would need, because stormwater is like wastewater in that the concentrations are lower, but the volumes are greater. So if you're just counting pounds of bad stuff, stormwater can deliver more pounds of bad stuff to the receiving waters than wastewater, even untreated wastewater can. So stormwater is a serious problem. And if you have a completely separate system, you really need to design your stormwater collection, assuming the wastewater is handled properly, which almost all of it is now. Then you have to treat the stormwater, and what level that treatment has to go to, and what people can afford, and how that is collected and managed. The problem with stormwater separate systems is they tend to be very small. They're little pockets of neighborhoods, and then they go gravity to wherever they can get to for a stream, and then whoop, out to the stream. And so you'll have, in our case, one wastewater collection system that serves 5 communities, including Killington, the ski area, and a very large geographic area, one plant. But we probably, just within the 7 square miles of the city of Rutland, we've probably got, I don't know the exact number, probably 30 stormwater, discrete stormwater systems, not little tiny ones, a pipe coming off one parking lot through one catch basin into a stream, but actually systems, subsystems, and trying to figure out how to treat that with it so being so diffuse is very, very difficult. That's why the green infrastructure is probably the best approach there, but that runs into challenges because of real estate issues. Usually it's if the city of Rutland is 85% developed, in the developed areas, which is where we need to do these things, we don't have a lot of public real estate or even vacant real estate to work with. So these are very big challenges, but the ideal system would be one that protects the receiving waters from wastewater pollution and from stormwater pollution, however that's achieved.
Yeah, I was actually wondering if you have stronger regulations in areas of new development that help avoid this problem in the first place.
Well, we require either new development or redevelopment to meet much higher standards. When old properties are redeveloped, we make them do stuff so that they have to end up with, there's a certain percentage, but they have to provide a better result in terms of whether it's combined or stormwater or separated, either area. When an old property is redeveloped, they have to improve the situation from a water quality standpoint and demonstrate that in order to get a permit to develop. Flat new development, like in a previously undeveloped area, has to meet substantially more stringent, and of course they cannot go to the combined. Stormwater from those systems are not allowed. We don't allow any new connections for stormwater to the combined system while we're spending all this money to try to manage and control it.
Patrick, you have a question about Burlington's Blue BTV program?
Yeah, hi. Hi, Rick and Jeff. Thanks for your time tonight. And Jeff kind of teed me up nicely with his mention of green infrastructure and the heavily developed Rutland area. I don't know if either of you are familiar with the Burlington Blue BTV program, but it was a pilot program that they did to basically incentivize residential kind of runoff mitigation before it got to the sewer, let alone the treatment plant. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that approach and, lessons learned, successes, failures, just any reflections, because it seems like a pretty clever way to reduce runoff in an area where you can't install mandate like buffers like were mentioned earlier. So yeah, just looking for a little, I've spoken to James Sherrard in Burlington and about the program, and I guess they're running a second phase that's a much more robust scale. So it seems that it was successful, but yeah, just looking for some outside perspective. And that's all. I'll take my question off the air, as they say.
Rick, Jeff? About anything about Burlington?
Yeah, I don't personally have any firsthand information about the program.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I don't either. But James is a very creative, and Megan are two of the best in the business. So that would definitely be worthy of further investigation. I would say any creative approach to encourage private property owners to reduce their contributions to the collection system, whether it's straight stormwater or combined, and any kind of an incentive approach would be worth exploring, trying. This is, death by 1,000 cuts. Mm-hmm. And, it's all the little stuff that when it all comes together creates a big problem. So if we can address it when it's still little stuff, that could make a big difference. So I would encourage folks to study that. And since I'm retiring at the end of the year, it'll be my successor who will have the opportunity to see whether that is something that we can emulate in Rutland.
Well, we're glad we got you while you're still around here. Peter, you have a question about legal issues.
Yes, hi. Thank you for both of your talks today. I was kind of curious as to what kind of takings issues you guys run into when you're dealing with, new installations. It seems as though there would be a lot of instances, as somebody mentioned earlier, how just even pushing back like the buffer zones can encroach on private property. Do you as municipalities have to sort of focus on how to avoid takings, or do you do more permit-based sort of exactions that sort of avoid something like that?
I'll dive into the legal quicksand first here. So I'm not an attorney, so I can say all kinds of stupid, wrong things, and I'm not going to get in trouble regarding that. Our approach has been to try to avoid that situation as much as possible, and we've had some success with that. Actually, we just had a major one for a replacement force, well, not minor area, but a major deal for a major force main replacement project that's overdue to be completed now. But the main issue there is, if you can avoid those conflicts, if you can work through negotiations where you have to use private property, incentives, whatever, that would be far, far preferable. Certainly the authority is there to do that, but exercising it would be an absolute last resort. One thing that the state recently enabled, and that we're discussing, I should say, negotiating with several key property owners, we have to reduce our stormwater flows in certain developed areas, but those developed areas, we don't have really any real estate other than the street right away. There's nothing else there. But there's a lot of large commercial developments in that area that also have to deal with the 3-acre rule. And so they have to spend a lot of money because they're very old systems, or no system at all, as the case may be in at least a couple of cases. And they're going to have to spend a lot of money. So this is an opportunity for us to go to them and say, look, you've got real estate and you're going to have to spend a few $100,000 to fix your stormwater runoff. We have an issue out here in the street that we also have to address. Can we work together? Can we make your system a little bigger and solve our problem? Well, you solve your problem. And oh, by the way, we have access to grant funds and all kinds of other things that you really don't have access to. So if we do a joint venture, we can make it cheaper for you to solve your problem, build a bigger system, and solve both problems at the same time. So that's kind of the theory and the approach. And once the private property owners understand that they're going to have a big bill to pay on their own, if they don't get any help, I mean, the state does have avenues of help, but we have a lot more we can get than they can get directly. Those conversations can become pretty productive, and so that's kind of a good win-win result under the current circumstances.
All right, great. I want to go. Rob Kidd has a COVID question for you.
Yeah, so I'm sure you've heard in Burlington they've shown traces of the COVID virus. And I just wanted to know if either of you in Rutland or in Vergennes have had that, and if there's steps you're doing to mitigate against that.
So in Vergennes, we were approached to do the testing, but they were looking for a 24-hour composite sample. We weren't able to provide that to them on a regular basis, so we are actually not involved in the COVID sampling.
Yeah, in Rutland, I believe we were the first community in the state to do that. We started in April, I think, and we ran it for a couple of months. There was a heavy subsidy through the company that we were, the laboratory and the company we were working with. Can't remember exact number of weeks that we ran it, but it was a couple of months. We had non-detects for every single sample, and then the price went through the roof. So we demurred and stopped doing the testing because there was nothing going on in our community that would indicate that it was ramping up or that we should be monitoring it. More recently, however, things have obviously ramped up. There's been a spike, and we've had a number of one facility in particular with some pretty bad outcomes in our community. So we've reinvestigated it, and Burlington is using a different vendor for their testing. The testing we did was through BioBot, which is a Massachusetts company, and their sensitivity, they require about 5% of the population to be actively infected before they can detect the RNA in the wastewater. The company that Burlington is using is Go Agua, I believe, and we've been negotiating with them. They can detect down to 1%. So, for example, they only need 600 RNA fragments per liter to get a positive result, where it's like 2,500 or 2,600 for BioBot. So, and they're cheaper. Oh, by the way. So, we've been discussing with them whether we want to restart. And I have my wastewater treatment plant chief operator really wants to do this. It is still kind of expensive. It runs about $10,000 a month. And so far, I have not been able to persuade the powers that be that the information we would receive and what we would do with that information would justify that expense. We believe that, however, that the health providers in the community could find it well worth that. So we've reached out to them, told them what the capabilities were or are, and asked them whether they would be willing to pay or subsidize part of that. Because what that really does is it will show you it'll show you the trend. Our infections, if you get positive results, it'll show you that infections are increasing or infections are decreasing. And it will show you that, because there's about a 24-hour turnaround on this stuff now, it will show you that before people even have symptoms. All right, they start shedding this stuff before they know they have it. So it's very good for telling you that you've got a week, 5 days to a week before you're going to get hit in the health. The health providers are going to get hit with a flurry of new infections. And from our standpoint, that's not actionable information. But from their standpoint, it might be very valuable. So that's what we're doing.
I haven't heard any indications that people would catch COVID from wastewater. Let's say it, if it were swimming season.
Initially, there was, again, before they knew a lot, there was a belief that that absolutely was, and there's strong reason to believe this based on other pathogens, that there's a likelihood that it would survive in a viable state for some period of time in wastewater. The standard operating procedures for personal protection and so forth that the people that work in that industry are required to and do take should provide more than ample protection against those infections, because they're also worried about hepatitis, and they're worried about all manner of other viruses and pathogens that do survive. So it was not something that would prevent us from, or require us to do anything special over and above what we do to protect against other pathogens. But these tests do not look for and don't require viable viruses. They just need to find relatively small fragments of the RNA, and they're looking for certain fragments that are, indicators. This is only this virus has this, and there can be no virus there at all, and they can still tell you how many people in your waste catchment area are actively infected once they get past that threshold.
Okay, well, that's really helpful. Jack Cushman, do you have a question? Jack Cushman, do you have a question for us?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thanks for this very sound presentation, and also for the work you're doing on a very knotty problem that's been with us for much too long. I think that you all must realize the deep frustration that people feel after 40 or 50 years of dipping our canoe paddles into palpable effluent, let's call it. Now, whether that's, I've done it on the Nashua River in Massachusetts, the Anacostia River in Washington, D.C., rivers in Birmingham, Alabama, and it just seems insufferable that when it rains hard, somebody flushes their toilet and on Capitol Hill and it goes into the Anacostia River. That said, we've got climate change on our hands now, and you people are all working hard to build in an infrastructure that can handle the problems of the kind that we see today or that we've seen over the past 30 years. I wonder now that intense rainfall events in the Northeast are twice as significant. The top rain events have twice as much water in them as they did when I was born. Are you confident that you're building infrastructure for the next 30 years that's going to allow us to make progress on this?
Great, Jeff. Rick?
That's a tough question. I would like to think we're confident. Yeah, it's a challenge. It really is a challenge. And there is I think what I'd like to speak to in that question, though, is the frustration. There is a high level of frustration. Rutland and Vergennes are very different in size and scope. I've been with Vergennes for 6 years. Just in the last 6 years, we're currently talking about going through 3 city managers. We're talking about a turnover on the select board of the entire select board nearly. And every time these things happen, we have to re-educate and we need to get people up to speed. And you never know who's coming on and what their opinions are. So when you ask me, am I confident? I would like to think I'm confident, but the person that stays generally is the chief wastewater operator. And so I'm going to have to deal with this stuff. So I'm going to do everything in my power to ensure that our engineering firms are building for the future and doing what's best. But there definitely is a level of frustration that I can speak to that goes on.
And I don't mean to be critical, but rather supportive. We support what you're doing.
Absolutely.
And we're working to get the federal funds and the popular support. So one day we'll get this job done.
Yeah.
I hope we can do it together.
Yeah, the statement regarding the increase in intensity of rainfall, actually you undershot that. There's a map, and I don't have it in the slide deck, and I'm not going to try to look for it now, but I can find it and provide it after the call here at the meeting. And it's probably a couple of years old now, but it was a map showing the United States and how rainfall events, I think in the previous, I think it was only like 10 years, the intensity had changed. And you had, various colors and shades of blue, and very light blue or actually white in areas where there had been no change or it had gone the other way. I think, there's some areas in the West that hadn't seen really anything. And then other areas of various shades of blue. When you got to the Northeast, it was black.
I think you're talking about the map in the National Climate Assessment.
That's it. That's the one. And in over a 10-year period, we have seen in excess of a 70% increase in intense rainfall events, which is, I think, beyond probably most of the projections that even the most dire climate models would have projected 10 years ago. And we're seeing, the extreme result here. And I can give you painful examples from my experience here in Rutland. The hailstorm was a beauty. We had rainfall at the peak rate was 8.5 inches per hour. And there is no engineered solution in any jurisdiction that can handle 8.5 inches per hour of rain. Maybe, I don't know, in some places where they have monsoons, they figured it out, but certainly not in the United States. That's just, you can't design for that. You just can't. And all you can do is, do your level best to prepare for it and then clean up the mess afterwards. I'm sorry, you just can't build for it. You can't afford it. You can't design for it. The good news is that was the extreme. But rainfall events in excess of 1 to upwards of 4 to 5 inches per hour for a period of 10, 15 minutes, something like that, are now typical. They're typical. They were unheard of 10, 15 years ago. And now the idea that we get through a year without having at least one of those would be almost unthinkable. It happens. I like to say what was it? I did the math on this once. It was something like in a 6-year period, we had something like 9 10-year storms. And some of those went to 30-year storms and 50-year storms. But we had like 9 10-year storms in 6 years. The old numbers don't apply.
Well, what a note to end this on. We have we have a tough problem that sounds like it's getting worse, but we have some ways to deal with it. So good luck. Thanks for all your work on this. I saw when Burlington, 30 years ago, passed an enormous bond vote to separate and put in some green infrastructure, and they're still having problems. So, well, thanks so much for joining us tonight, Jeff Wennberg, Rick Chaput. This has been a great discussion and a great contribution by our participants as well. We want to encourage people to come back, check our website. Rob's put the slide up there with our website, and you can find the schedule of our next few events right there. And so again, thanks so much for joining us.